Welcome in to a special edition of Can We Just Talk, the podcast. We had to call a special edition for this show just because of the recent events that have been taking place with the chaos in the Capitol, the storming of the Capitol building coming on January 6th. We figured it was such a big event, we needed to talk about it. We couldn't wait until our normal episode that usually airs on Saturday. We did not want to take up the entire episode with talk all about this. So we figured the best option would be to come to you to make a special edition of this episode and to give you a recount of exactly what happened on January 6th, as well to tell you what we think this means for the future of this country. So joining me today is Joey Block, former news director from WRSU, Chris Sakonis and Jacob Berg, both two regulars on Can We Just Talk, also making an appearance tonight. And we are very excited to have this opportunity to kind of recount exactly what happened. Also, on the positive note, Joey Block making his Polar Media debut. We're hoping to get a lot more coverage coming from him in the near future. But we figured, again, like I said, to give this special edition, to give a closer look to exactly what happened. And guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight as we kind of dive into this here. As I said, chaos in the Capitol, storming of the Capitol building, coming when, Congress, the Senate, were meeting to confirm the Electoral College vote, the count to confirm the presidential victory for President-elect Joe Biden. In the middle of this, around 1 p.m. yesterday, chaos broke loose. Protesters who had been gathering outside of the Capitol building in preparation for this had made their way inside the building in a very chaotic scene. I won't go too far into this other than saying there has now been reported 5 deaths that have come from these events, maybe not directly tied to what has happened. There's 2 directly tied to what has happened now, but 5 total deaths from the events that have taken place on January 6th outside and inside the Capitol building. I'll kind of jump right in, Joey. I'd love to see if you can give us a quick recap of kind of what happened, maybe leading up and to the start of this entire thing. And then Chris, I can let you kind of take it from there. So Joey, I'll throw it over to you if you want to bring us in here.
Sure, Troy, and thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be making my debut, and I hope to be doing a lot more stuff with you guys. So this is pretty much what happened. It started off with everyone knew about the Stop the Steal rally that was happening at 11 a.m. in front of in Washington, where the president was rallying his supporters, saying, "We're going to change the election. I won, Joe Biden didn't." And it really, I would have to say from an objective point of view that the president has a lot of big rallies, right? And he says a lot of things, but I think this was the most non-scripted rally that you could find with the president of the United States. I mean, he's used a lot of profanities throughout the rally. He called former Georgia gubernatorial Stacey Abrams completely overweight. She weighs over 130 pounds more than she should, which if you listen to him 4 years ago, you may say, well, that's not really new, but he hasn't really done that so much in a while. But now he kind of went back to that, railing about even as far things as Oprah, saying, "Oh, I was on one of her final shows. We used to get along, but ever since I ran for president, she doesn't really like me anymore." And really just going off and saying all these things that a lot of really didn't make much sense and really weren't cohesive, and pretty much going off of this view that he believes he actually won the election. Now, some people have said, "Oh, he doesn't really believe this. He's just saying that." Well, if you really look at what the president consumes now, he actually does believe this, quite frankly, because he watches Newsmax. Fox is now the modern voice of what he doesn't really like Fox News anymore. And all these conservative news outlets that are saying, yeah, the president was rigged, and showing all these doctored videos of election rigging, ballots being stuffed in ballot boxes and machines being messed with, and all these conspiracies that really been leading up to the last couple of months. We've been seeing a lot of lawsuits, especially some strange ones from the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who, as you all may recall, at one point had sweat coming down. He was sweating so much during one of these press conferences that his hair dye kind of went down there, which is like, it was not a good look for him. And then Sidney Powell was one of the attorneys who had to lead the case because she ranted so many conspiracies, quite frankly, that it was even out of the realm of the Trump campaigns tolerating it. But anyways, a little off that side note. So he went and rallied support. He was saying, "Oh, I'm going to join you down at the Capitol." Now, some people might say that was a little of a hyperbole, but some people might say, "Oh, he was around telling his supporters to go down though." So there was supposed to be a march. Everyone's going to go down there, and I don't think people really expected it to be all of much, considering at this point Congress was doing a formal procedure of certifying the vote, which doesn't really get much. It's not really something you normally would see as controversial or anything that would be contested, because even like up to the electoral college, you back in the 1800s, there may have been some switching of stuff like that, but at this point you don't really see anything like that different from the popular vote of each state. Like, for example, Ohio picked Donald Trump. You're not going to see it just magically flip for Joe Biden anymore. That just doesn't happen. Despite the president trying and trying and trying again to make this happen multiple times, multiple lawsuits in multiple states. And he tried to go to the Supreme Court. They threw it out. Oh, and that was another thing he also went against. He also criticized his own Supreme Court justices that he, in fact, appointed and nominated to the court, including Brett Kavanaugh in particular, saying, "Oh, I defended them against these lies," when he never said Brett Kavanaugh by name. But Brett Kavanaugh, if you may recall, was very controversial because he was someone who was accused of sexually assaulting women. And a lot of people said that one of the accusers was confused and didn't really know. And other people were saying that was in criticizing the woman. But anyways, Kavanaugh claimed to be, and as far as we know, is a devout Catholic. And the president stood by him, said, "This is the guy. We're not taking him out," because, as you know, there were a lot of times where this has happened. It's called borking now on the Senate floor, where Robert Bork under Ronald Reagan was so controversial. They called off the nomination, they withdrew it, or people had to push back, but it's time. But anyways, going back to where we are now. Now, the president was saying, "Okay, we're going down there. Let's go rally them." So, of course, the supporters go down there. The president does not. He goes back to the White House to watch this all unfold. And, of course, the violence just built up from there. It was just protests originally, but what really was the straw on the camel's back was when the vice president came out. He put out a tweet with this letter about 2 pages or so long saying, "I don't have the authority to determine the certification or not to. I can't reject or accept the results. It's not my role. I'm just the presider," which is true. It's not him. It's the member of Congress. And at that point, his supporters just were enraged. They got angry. They started approaching the Capitol, and more than the Capitol Police were prepared for, which there's a lot of criticism of. Well, and they just started storming it, managed to get inside while the senators and the congressmen and women were debating the results. I believe Arizona was the state that the Senate was on, and Ted Cruz was speaking on the Senate floor when this all went to happen. And it all just really went downhill fast from there. And I'm sure Chris can attest to that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty rapid destabilization. I mean, in the morning, the story was, president's supporters had come to Washington to protest what they felt was, a stolen election, which, any reputable source will tell you that there's no evidence to support that. But, there's a lot of alternative media outlets, Newsmax, One America, those types of outlets peddling that, and a lot of people buy into it. And I think that the media aspect in how we got here is a pretty interesting topic, but I'm gonna save that for later. But it pretty rapidly escalated from, in the morning the news was, oh, they're going to come and protest a little bit, it'd be more like a rally. I think it was branded as a rally. The president had posted something on his social media about it, encouraging people to come out. And then in the early afternoon, quickly a few people decided to storm the Capitol, and then the crowd followed in behind them, and we all sort of know what happened from there. Protesters were sitting in the speaker's chair in the House chamber, sitting in Pelosi's office, ransacking offices, stealing podiums, stealing property. Like, it was just, it was a mess. And it just sort of goes to show how quickly things can deteriorate in such an emotionally charged situation. And the other thing that really stuck out to me, and then I'll throw it back to you guys, is the fact that the Capitol Police, and to a lesser extent the DC Police, who I believe were there in some sort of role initially, were not prepared for riot control at all. Most of them were barely armed, if at all. They were heavily outnumbered. It was really shocking, just as an outside observer, to see how unprepared they were for the possibility of something like this happening. When we knew that there was a danger that extremists would be, near the Capitol building, and some with active intent to harm. So it was a pretty dangerous moment, pretty dangerous day on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and Chris, the people who had entered the Capitol building, it was a bit of a mishmash of who was actually there. Members from the conspiracy group QAnon, members from the group the Proud Boys, as well as far-right social media influencers, which just sounds really strange to say, but all there with the same idea that they felt that they had been cheated out of this election. They felt that the government was doing whatever they wanted to do and disregarding what they felt was true. I mean, Joey, it's interesting. You kind of said this. President Trump honestly believes that he was stolen. This election was stolen from him. The scary thing is, so did all these people that were in the Capitol building. These people were angry. They were disturbed. They were violent for the reasons that they truthfully felt that they had been stolen. This election had been stolen from them. And because of that, that's the type of emotions we were seeing. We saw the hatred, we saw the anger from these thousands of people that were protesting yesterday. And like I said, from the group, from the Proud Boys, from the QAnon conspiracists, it was terrifying to see the ways people were coming in here. And it was, some haunting images that will, be circulating for years to come, with people marching with Confederate flags inside the Capitol building. Unthinkable to think of, now in the time we're living in, that this is still happening. But Jacob, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts, following this, and we'll in a little bit we'll talk more about, when things resumed, when action resumed inside of the Capitol building, and what had happened after they had finally confirmed the Electoral College votes.
All right, thank you, Troy. I did have just a couple of things to add on, and I want to thank Joey and Chris for coming on, giving a great rundown for us. Definitely appreciate that. One thing I just wanted to add, I know we've probably all seen the clips, but I believe it was at that rally, there were a lot of different phrases that people like Trump, Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump Jr., like things that they were saying that definitely seemed to be towing the line and kind of pointing their supporters towards like acts of rebellion by saying, we're going to take them by force. We're going to be strong, like things along those lines that, you could clearly see as, trying to incite their base. And it's intriguing to say this now, seeing what we've seen at previous rallies. But I think, this goes to show that, things that are said that are meant to be insightful should really be taken seriously. I also wanted to add that I agree with Joey's point on like the Electoral College vote usually isn't a big deal, especially because, unfaithful electors aren't quite as common, or electors that go against their state's popular vote, or however their state is set up to do it. But actually, not all states have laws in place to protect against unfaithful electors. So, if you live in a state where you don't have those laws in place, maybe think about doing something, because that's kind of a crazy thing. I also wanted to add one or two more things real quick. I believe we were just discussing before, the death count has now risen to 5. I believe if we had one of the protesters or rioters that was killed by police forces or defense forces there. We had 3 that are being reported as kind of deaths in the vicinity, but may not be like directly due to somebody else harming them. And I believe right before we started, there was a reported death of a police officer. So, rest in peace, obviously, to all those people who are injured. Definitely a sad sight to see that. And the last point I had is I was just reading an article. I believe they found multiple bombs inside the area near both the DNC and RNC areas in that building. So, beyond just protesting and getting in and, making a scene, there was, lives taken, and there was, an attempt to take more.
Yeah, and it was fascinating to see once politics had resumed in the day, what the actions had led to, and going into this, I mean, the entire process, and the reason everyone was at the Capitol building, it was a date marked on a lot of politicians' calendar, a lot of senators, Congress men and women, was for the purpose they had to confirm the Electoral College vote. And going into it, there were several Republican senators and representatives saying they were going to contest for certain states that had turned in favor of the Democratic Party coming the election. Some of those states include Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and some others as well. And as things were interrupted, they were interrupted during when they were discussing whether or not they should object to Arizona's counting. Going into it, I believe there was around 11 senators who were looking to object to counting these electoral votes because for some reason they may think that there was, maybe some mistruth of how these were counted. And they believe that President Trump was being slighted in the process. After the events, certain senators had held on to their positions and certain senators had actually switched. I think some of the surprising ones as you watched the live coverage last night, longtime Trump supporter and Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, he'd actually switched his stance and switched his decision to actually not contest these states. He even talked about, he didn't want Biden to be president. He had stood with Donald Trump throughout his 4 years. He had stood with him throughout the election process, and he even stood with him leading up to the events that took place when the Capitol building was stormed. But to kind of sum up what he said, enough was enough. It was time to move on and to get over it and to understand what is happening. To understand that it's time to move on. Mitch McConnell also giving some, powerful words when they had resumed this discussion around 9 p.m. last night. Mitch McConnell pretty much saying the same things. This is not what we stand for. This is not how we conduct our democracy. It is time to understand that there is no evidence and there is no reason to believe that this election was fraudulent. We have done what we needed to do to investigate whether or not we believe this. And from our investigations and what has taken place inside the court, we have received no evidence saying that we should actually be looking at this. And it's interesting, maybe one of you guys can give me an idea about when this has last happened. But what was taking place yesterday, what they were talking about, does not happen very often. Contesting the Electoral College votes. That's not a normal occurrence. In 2016, in 2012, in 2008, the last elections, yes, it's something that can happen, but it's something that very rarely does happen if someone actually objects to counting these votes. And I saw an interesting video yesterday in 2016 when someone had proposed this idea, and Joe Biden was serving still as the president of the Senate since he was in his vice presidential role. And he dismissed this saying, no, this is not something we can do. This doesn't happen very often. And the fact that there were this many senators trying to propose this idea, it was kind of disturbing. And Mitch McConnell had reeled in that idea saying, we cannot do this. This is not something we are supposed to do. We are here to open the votes, to count the votes, and report the votes. But some senators did not believe this was the right idea. Ted Cruz, he's spewed his information for weeks leading up to this throughout the presidential election that he believes that there was fraudulence involved. Another one, Josh Hawley from Missouri. There's a photo of him walking into the Capitol building before this had all happened with a fist raised, pretty much saying, let's kick some ass today when we do this. Hours later, we saw what happened. There's a lot of demand for him to step down for the fact that there's blood on his hands as well as President Trump's hands. And himself and Ted Cruz went late into the night last night because they were still standing by what they said. Interestingly enough, Josh Hawley, he had sent out a very ill-timed fundraising event. At the exact same time of what was happening, a fundraiser was sent out for his campaign while these events were taking place. So it's disturbing to say the least that still senators, after all that happened, and still members of the House of Representatives, after all that had happened, were still standing by the idea that they believe fraudulence is around. And I think before I turn it back to someone else, I think the most disturbing fact was Ted Cruz saying 39% of Americans still believe that there was fraudulence involved in this election. And the question is, that may be true, but why is there fraudulence believed in this election? It's because this misinformation and these lies are being spewed into American media, American news, by these Republican leaders, by the President of the United States himself, throwing the ideas that fraudulence is taking place. So why would it be surprising to hear that 39% of Americans believe that there is fraudulence involved? It's not surprising when the President of the United States is saying this before. It's an unprecedented thing to have the President of the United States to conduct himself in this way. It's not surprising to see this many people saying this. I'll kind of open it up, Joey, to kind of get your thoughts on what this may mean for the United States, and if I missed any key points.
So, Troy, I want to start. I don't mean to fact check you on your own show, but it was actually 13 senators going into this were saying that they were going to contest, and then obviously the number went down from there. But I think the remarkable thing is that there still were senators who objected at the end of the day. And it just goes to show you how much power Trump still wields over the Republican Party, even after all. Someone says, well, this is going to be the thing that all the Republicans are just going to run away from. Well, that's not true. I've always been someone who has cautioned against that, being the president's still going to be around. He's still going to be doing something. He's still going to be endorsing candidates, campaigning, rallying, making his voice heard on Twitter. Well, we'll see how long that goes. And more or less, you're going to see the president in action, because think about it. These senators, that most of them who have objected, have two reasons for that. And they're both political reasons. One, they're up for re-election in 2022. And if they defy the president, they may be primaried with someone who's farther to the right, who's more into Trump, and his supporters will go out and support them, their opponent. And that senator, they won't be a senator anymore. And that most of them don't want that. Then you got to look at the other one. When you mentioned Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, they both have presidential ambitions. This is not really a secret. It's more of an open secret, if anything, because they haven't, quote unquote, admitted to it. But more or less, Josh Hawley he's a younger guy in the party, and he wants to make his voice heard, and he wants Trump's endorsement, more or less. And Cruz, he is very conservative, to say the least, although I don't know if contesting an election would be called conservative. I don't think that can necessarily be associated as liberal, conservative, progressive, however you want to call it, but it's Trumpian, and Trump is still controlling the party. I haven't seen the most recent polling based ever since that this whole Capitol incident has occurred, but I still say that the president will have a hold on a significant part of the party. I still think he's well above 50% approval in the Republican Party, if I had to guess. Of course, that's just a guess. But yeah, more or less. And you also mentioned the whole point about the last time this happened on the floor, as well as objections in general. The last one that comes to mind for me is in 2004, when Barbara Boxer, a Democratic senator from California, along with another member of the House of Representatives, contested the results from Ohio. Because Ohio, there was some concerns that there was voter suppression. And I think a lot of the rhetoric the Bush campaign was using at that time was to kind of go off this anti-gay, homophobic culture that was still out there in America in 2004. Because that Ohio's what really brought in that election for the Bush campaign. So I think a lot of that really is what generated that objection. But again, it was not anything like this. It was one person. It was for that reason. Well, this, was not for a reason of principle based on what I think there were some people that had principle, but a lot of it was more or less a political reason. Like, the president's going to get us. He's going to be mad at us if we don't. He's going to rant about us on Twitter. I mean, look at Kelly Loeffler. The reason why you saw the switch there, I should point out to the audience that there was the general special runoff election in Georgia for the Senate seats that now the Democrats hold, and now they will have a majority, narrow one and a de facto one, but a majority nonetheless. She came out the night before when the president went down to Georgia, again, ranting about his call with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, basically trying to get him to change the Georgia election results hours before not even hours before. It was just over at this point, trying to get him to change the votes. Said, oh, you need to find me over 11,000 votes, which would have been enough to put over the top. Of course, he didn't do that. And at this rally, Loeffler said, yes, I am going to back the president and object to the election results in Georgia. And she was supposed to be the sole senator to get on board that and to have that objection happen. Now, this was all before the Capitol the Capitol takeover, I guess is the better word for it. Once that happened, she changed her mind quite quickly for two reasons. One, that event, but two, she's not beholden to Trump anymore. She's not beholden to him at all. She lost. Like, it's over for her. And I don't think she has any bigger political ambitions. So her strategy, ignore the president. And we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. But I think that's what's going on right now. That's why Lindsey Graham said, oh, no, I'm done, because I think he's trying to make the calculation of, okay, I think I need to distance myself from the president. But there's still many Republicans who are going to say, I'm with this guy. And then there's the question of whether the Trump supporters stay with the Republican Party, because as was mentioned before, there were bombs sent to the DNC and the RNC parts of the Capitol, and which you would seem strange. It's like you think they would like the RNC, but I think a lot of people think the RNC didn't do enough for them or enough for Trump to get him over the finish line. At least that's what they're saying. And there's a rumor out there I'm seeing online. A lot of people who are Trump supporters want to leave the party because they didn't do enough for Trump, and that the fact that they certified this vote was the last straw for these people, especially the vice president. I don't know of a lot of Trump supporters out there are going to really be thrilled with him. Again, I think it's a matter of waiting for polling to see how this is. These are all just predictions at this point.
Yeah, Joey, and I just want to, build off of what you said in terms of the political consequences of this. Senators like Hawley and Cruz, they're really looking towards the future. In the case of Hawley, especially towards running for the White House in 2024, which, say whatever you will about that. He's considered a quote unquote rising star in the party. There is a sizable contingent that really feeds into these alternative news sources. I mean, I would go so far to call them fake news sources. And, they live in a reality where the election was stolen. These voting machines are hiding hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, however many Trump votes, and that the election was stolen, and all this crazy stuff. And it's not going away. If anything, I would expect the percentage of people, not just in the Republican Party, but just in the general public, to believe in all of this stuff to go up over the next 4 years, not down. And it really goes back to social media, the way social media is constructed. If you took two data sets, you took the data set that correlated with, percentage of Americans who have a smartphone and use social media, and the percentage of Americans, or I should say rather, the degree of polarization between the two parties, between left and right, you'd see a pretty close correlation around the late 2000s. And there were other factors to that too, the financial crisis, the recession. There was some racial animus behind Obama getting elected, but there's a pretty close correlation. And I think there's some causation to, social media has algorithms that aren't really designed to preserve democracy. They're designed to get you to click on more stuff and stay on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever it is. Those algorithms, not exactly intentionally, but they're still designed in a way where if you're say you're a down the road Republican, you click on a Fox News video, well, in your suggestions, you're going to see Newsmax, you're going to see One America, you're going to see, in some cases, Alex Jones, you're going to see all these different sources. And, a lot of people are going to slowly fall into that rabbit hole, and it's going to end up with them, believing that the election was rigged without any actual evidence. So social media has really damaged, I think, the nature of our politics. And it's not exclusively a Republican phenomenon. Both sides have moved away from the middle in the last 20 years, but it's not something that's going away. There's talk about regulating social media, and I think that would help. But really, the time to discuss what this means to our democracy was 15 years ago when, you could have kept Pandora from getting out of the box, but Pandora is out of the box. And I think politically, we're going to be reckoning with that for a really long time.
And what that means for politics, and Joey, you kind of said it, the idea of Trumpian, it's almost a growing feeling that there's going to be a third party soon. There's going to be the Trump party, or whatever it may be called, with this growing dissettlement now of people who will align themselves with the Republican Party and now find themselves unhappy with the Republican Party and more aligned with anything Trump may say. And it's so fascinating because this is such a wide range of people who are now finding themselves. As I said, the people who were inside the Capitol building yesterday are obviously seen as the extremists from these groups, but these are people that are falling in from places like the QAnon conspiracies and the Proud Boys. And the thing you have to understand is people from the QAnon conspiracies and align themselves with those groups, they have a lot of animosity geared towards the Republican Party as well. It's not just towards the Democratic Party. And now you're seeing a further split. The split that was usually the Republican and Trump divided against the Democratic Party. And now we're seeing it be divided against the Republican Party. And now, like we said, it seems that there's a growing idea that there's going to be a Trump party or whatever it may be. Not to say that it has to be Trump running that, but as you said, there were political motives behind what people were doing yesterday inside the Senate, such as Hawley, such as Ted Cruz, where there's 70 million plus people who are willing to vote for someone like Donald Trump because of what he stood for and what he believed and how he acted and how he handled this country. There's a lot of voters out there that these people could get come election season 2024, come election season 2028. They understand that. And it's sad because it is political motives, the idea of I want to be in power. I want to have that responsibility of being the president of the United States. And this is seen as a venue to get to that point. And that's why we see senators standing by whatever Trump says. And I think it was interesting hearing what the senator from Georgia did by completely switching her opinion because her political, her political track was completely thrown off because she lost her seat in the Senate. And because these people are still feeling the pressure that they understand that there's 70 million voters out there that could be theirs if they align with what Trump is saying, they are doing whatever they want to stay in that political alignment with those people. And I think we're going to start to see a more and more split. And Chris, like you said, social media has not helped. If you want a great podcast to listen to, other than what we're talking about right now on Can We Just Talk, the podcast, The Rabbit Hole by the New York Times, does a great job of explaining how these algorithms work, how they divide people even more, and how if you start watching one side, that's really all you're going to watch if you're on one social media site or whether it be YouTube. And it's unprecedented, and it's reaping the benefits now because we are seeing the biggest divide in this country in a very, very long time. And it doesn't seem to be getting any better. And because of that, we saw what happened yesterday.
I just want to add in, I really liked you guys' discussion of the kind of the split now coming up in the Republican Party. I thought, we may have seen, almost a parallel, definitely not the exact same situation, but, something along those lines in the Democratic primary, when we had people that were strongly for Bernie Sanders. And there was, similar threats, similar thoughts, I think, from, most Americans or most Democratic supporters, like, are we going to be able to hold our party together? Are we going to be able to come to a candidate that we agree on without saying, if Biden wins the the nomination, then people who support Bernie will just go off and write him in on the ballot. I think that was definitely a worry for a lot of people inside the Democratic Party. So could be interesting to see some parallels there.
Jacob, I actually agree with you on that. I think it's important to note this is a weird time in political history that there's a split in both parties. And it's going to be interesting to see over the next 4 years which party it damages the most. Now, before all this started, I probably would have said the Democrats, because a lot of people aren't talking about this. Democrats, for most part of history, have been united on everything, no matter what. Even if they were different, the moderates, the conservatives, the liberals, and more of the socialists far left that you're starting to see from Bernie Sanders. This group all kind of, they all got along, but now it seems like the party, there is a part of it that's going so far to the left, Bernie Sanders, AOC, that it's dividing between people like Joe Biden, who more of a moderate Democrat, not necessarily, he wasn't necessarily a guy who was like for abortion all the way, pro-choice. He's a Catholic, so he may have been from a legislative perspective, but in terms of his own personal view, he probably would say more pro-choice. I'd have to look exactly on things he's said in the past based on what I know about Joe Biden and whether he said it public or not. That's probably what it would be. Now, for more progressive Democrats, that's not really an acceptable thing. In the 90s it was, but now it's like, well, if you're not pro-choice, then you don't really care. You're not a progressive. Well, if you don't want, Medicare for all, you should be out of the party. Done. Like putting this litmus test in place. And the Republicans are the same way. If you're pro-life, that's great. If you're pro-choice, well, get out. We don't like you. You're a rhino. That's a word Donald Trump frequently uses, and a lot of conservatives. It's come long before Trump's perspective. And that's really what we're going to have to wait and see how this all works, because as I mentioned, I've heard a lot about this. I even heard it back before all this, before the election, on my show In the Middle on WRSU. I'm now doing a plug, but it has a point, believe me.
In the Middle, soon to be on Polar Media as well.
Yes, that was the big announcement. It is coming soon, shortly. We're just getting all the episodes, and I really look forward to it. But the point I was trying to get at here is I talked to someone who was running in the Republican primary in the 6th District of New Jersey, Sammy Gindi. He was more of a Trumpian type of Republican, running against someone who was not as much, but still supported Trump. He was more of a moderate, and the moderate ended up winning. But more or less, I talked to Gindi, and a lot of what he was saying is he was hearing online that there's going to be, after Trump wins the second term, of course, he thought he was going to win a second term, that there's going to be a divide, and a lot of Trump's supporters are going to be leaving the party. They're going to form a third party called the Trumpkins. And I found it a little weird. I even said, like, really? This is a thing? He's like, well, I don't know, not for sure, maybe. But now I think it's kind of seeing where we're going with that. And we're Republicans, we're going to start to see where this all plays down. And this is going into another segment we're probably going to talk about, but it's something I just saw come through the wire here. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is resigning. Now, you're probably wondering, well, it's just the Education Secretary. The big deal is she was with Trump all the way. She has been there since day one of this administration. There is not even a thought this woman would ever resign. And that's the same way with Elaine Chao, the Transportation Secretary, but it's for different reasons, because she's Mitch McConnell's wife, the Senate Majority Leader. So it would kind of be hard to fire her without there being major repercussions from McConnell and the establishment Republicans. But DeVos, she was someone Trump liked a lot. She was a big donor in his campaign. She advocated for a lot of the things that he wanted in education, pro-choice, taking back some student loan forgiveness, getting rid of some of those things, trying to make the department in their mind more efficient and cutting spending. Also, getting rid of federal protections for sexual assault on college campuses. These are things that they were working on, and she was behind one. Well, she got some criticism for these things, but the president stood by her. He stood by him, and it was a magical relationship. And now it seems like, well, the heat's getting too hot, and now we're going to a different world, and we're going to have to wait and see how these Republicans really interact as well as the Democrats.
Yeah, Joey, definitely looking forward to seeing that. One thing, Troy, I don't know if we're going off schedule here, but I definitely think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the latest video that Trump posted. So I don't know if you want to tie that in or if you had anything more to add.
Yeah.
I had a couple takes on that.
Go ahead. You want to give us a quick recap of what happened? We got a few minutes left here, and give us your thoughts on what it means.
Yeah, sure. So I think just a couple hours before we start our recording today, video came out from Trump. I know he's kind of blocked on a lot of social media. He's not really getting a ton of news coverage. But I guess this video still came out. I guess he pre-recorded it and sent it or something along those lines. But it was basically him conceding to Joe Biden, him saying, the protests or the riots that wasn't good and you'll get prosecuted. Like, it really, in my mind, outside of I guess this claim that the National Guard was used immediately, which I don't think is true, but other than that, it really actually seemed like a very well put together, very logical, like reasonable speech, which if you've been watching a lot of Donald Trump lately, you don't usually see that. So in my mind, I think this is him trying to smooth things over a little bit. I think this is him saying, you know what, like, it's done. There's nothing more I can do. I'm not going to be president. But, if I want to have some sort of standing, some sort of relationship with the Republican Party, or some sort of future in politics down the road after this next presidential, after this next presidency, I'm guessing he's thinking that I'm going to get the next bid from the Republican Party, or someone in my crowd is going to get that bid. And I think what he's trying to do is just trying to smooth out the water a little bit. He's trying to go back and say, all right, this went a little bit too far. We're going to try to end this presidency on a high note, and try to make it seem like, he's been professional and consummate, the whole time. Whereas, just so he can just set himself up for the future that's upcoming.
And Jacob, I think, one thing is you can always tell when President Trump is reading off a teleprompter, because the speech styles are always very different. His most recent speech was most certainly written for him. Maybe he wrote it himself. I'd be surprised if he did. But yes, like you said, it was trying to put a wrap to the chaos that has unfolded over the last 48 hours now. Far too little, far too late at this point. 5 people have died in the past 48 hours from what has happened at the Capitol building. So yes, it may be something he's trying to smooth over what had happened. Maybe it's for the future, his own future political gains that he has in mind. But the first time he's admitted that he had lost this election. Interesting note: he never once mentions President-elect Joe Biden's name once in that speech. He just talks about the next incoming office. So yes, it's the first time he's admitted to this. It took since November, and this is the first time he's admitted that. He still believes that he was cheated out of this. After the actions he took yesterday, his entire support group still believes that he was cheated out of this. It's going to be interesting to see what unfolds come, Joe Biden's inauguration. Will it be smooth? Will it be completely peaceful? I very highly doubt it. I'd be surprised if there was no events that take place that day. But I think this is going to be something that lasts over the next 4 years until the next election. This is going to be dismay, like Joey, like you said. There's, it's not very calm right now in the Republican Party. That may fracture the Republican Party. There may be a lot of voters who go vote elsewhere if Donald Trump gives his, support to another candidate, or if he runs himself again. We'll have to see. There's talk about the 25th Amendment being invoked. There's talk about another impeachment taking place of what has unfolded yesterday. And I know we didn't really get to talk about that too much, but we don't know too much about what is happening yet. There's strong support from the Democratic side of saying he needs to be removed from office immediately using the 25th Amendment. And if that doesn't happen, there's a strong belief that they are going to initiate the impeachment process again. So we'll have to see what unfolds on that. And maybe tomorrow on Can We Just Talk, we can provide another update on that of what is happening. But, guys, just a final takeaway from this, it was very interesting to see, how many people have been completely influenced by the past 4 years of this president, to a point where they have such a lack of faith in the democratic process that takes place, to a point where they can be told one thing by one man, and it is making them willing to commit felonies and federal crimes by storming and destroying the Capitol building, something that has not happened since the British in the War of 1812. Very disturbing to see, and we'll have to see how this unfolds and what happens with President Trump after he was really unable to provide any response to stop the protesters from doing this and to possibly even edge them on. So guys, I want to thank you again for coming on to the special edition of Can We Just Talk. We will provide a little bit more of an update tomorrow on our regular scheduled programming for Can We Just Talk. Hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about some more lighthearted topics and discussions and developments. We'll try to throw some good stuff in there, but we'll try to provide an update as well. So guys, thanks so much again for coming on for this special edition. And we're looking forward to getting some more content out there. So again, this was Can We Just Talk? Troy DiSavino, Chris Sakonis, Jacob Berg, and Joey Block. Everyone stay safe, and we'll be back tomorrow with some more content. Thanks so much.